All right, thank you, Hakan, once more for making time to do this presentation to us. For introduction, Hakan is a chartered geologist and has more than 30 years experience in sedimentary multi-commodity exploration, in coal mining geology, as well as coal quality. He has worked as a coal technologist dealing with all aspects of mining geology, coal quality and coal petrography, by providing geological expertise to many projects where he created a number of geological and sedimentary models for direct application to exploration, product optimization, coal gas utilization, coal gas safety issues, and geotechnical assessment using borehole geological data, logs, and other available geological data by using various mining and petroleum softwares. And since 2002, he provided geological expertise and evaluation to mines and deposits in Russia, the CIS, Asia, Africa, Australia, Europe, and North America, as well as Latin America. He's a competent person for resource and reserve evaluation under the international classification codes such as the JORC and NI 43101. He's highly experienced in coal quality issues from coke making to combustion, and an expert in all types of coal evaluation from lignite to anthracite deposits. He's currently a technical director of DMT Turkey and UK. He obtained his PhD in geology in 1990, his MSc in civil engineering in 2007, as well as his BSc honors geology and geotechnical engineering from the University of Southampton. Without further ado, Hakan, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I very appreciate. Tonight, I'll be talking about the thermal coal and its future and possible choices and all the issues that might be associated with the use of coal in the coming decades. I just want to introduce our locations as a company. DMT has been located around the world, so I'm located in location number 7 at the moment in Turkey, but I'm also part of the UK office. If you want to find out more about DMT services, etc., I'm sure my colleagues from South Africa, Johannesburg office may give you background to what we can offer. So in order to highlight what I'm going to talk about is that, this is a kind of earlier publication that I made in 2017-18, that I made some predictions for the future of thermal coal, and made the prediction that it's not that doom and gloom, but there are some hope in the future. So after 6 years, still, we are talking about coal, which is quite good, and in a way that we need to focus on its use, and then what the consequences are for all of us, the practitioners, the society, policymakers, etc. So basically, I'll be talking about the global carbon cycle first, and then the Paris Agreement, and then obviously the climate change and the challenges that posed for thermal coal, and reality versus wishful thinking, and then the conclusions about the coal itself. So before we talk about coal, I think we need to talk about global carbon cycle. This has come to kind of attention to people's arena about in the 1990s, and this is from the very one of the earlier publications from 1990 from IPCC's scientific assessment for the climate change. And I have also used this this diagram, and although it looks a little bit sort of simplistic and a little bit primitive, it just highlighted some kind of budget for available carbon circulating in the planet itself. So if you look at the basic numbers here, and the atmosphere has got 750 gigatons of carbon available, and then we are contributing about 5 gigaton into it. So it's about less than 1% is accounted in the 1990s. So there are some interesting numbers here. If you look at the oceans, that is the biggest depository for carbon, which is kind of natural because we know from the geological records that all the limestones or carbonates had been part of the surrounding in the oceans. So in a way, most of the carbon, if you look at this this diagram, most of the carbon is accumulated in the oceans, and also some of it is available in the atmosphere. So after 30 years, when we come to around 2020, this is from the publication 2020 from the same organization, and then this time that simplistic diagram has been kind of evolved and then turned into a nice looking picturesque diagram. So the numbers again, if you look at after 30 years, the ocean still accumulating 38 gigatons of carbon, and then our contribution to the atmospheric environment has increased from 5 to 9.4 gigatons, almost doubled. And then the corresponding increase in the atmospheric carbon now is accounted as 860 gigatons. So the other interesting numbers are here is that after 2020, ICCP presented these numbers in a kind of range. For example, if you look at the soil storage capacity, it's ranging from 1,500 to 2,400 gigatons, and then vegetation is accumulating from 50 to 650 gigatons, and then permafrost is regarded as a simple one single number, 1,700 gigatons. And then the coal reserves obviously had been indicated as 445 to 540 gigatons. So that is nice because it just gives us some sort of uncertainty in certain locations in the planetary systems. Like it shows us that soil's environment is storing significant amount of carbon, and as the oceans and vegetation, etc. But when we come to the latest numbers from the same organizations, suddenly the ranges just disappeared, and significantly the ocean has been dropped to 37,000 gigatons. Almost 1,000 just disappeared from the system. And then vegetation has turned into a single number, 450, rather than a range. Soil is also kind of being given a single number. I think these are the mean numbers between the minimum and maximum capacity. And permafrost, if you look at the previous permafrost number, it was 1,700 gigatons, now dropped to 1,400 gigatons. So we know that permafrost is also accumulating significant amount of methane. Maybe some contribution is added into the atmosphere from permafrost. So someone needs to read the report from IPCC thoroughly to understand exactly what's going on, why these numbers have changed. There must be some reasons, but obviously the important part is that for us, 875 gigatons is still stored in the atmosphere. We are still contributing into the system. So, people obviously kind of got alarmed, and then they said, well, we got to do something. And then with these numbers around, the magic solution has been suggested, so let's do Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement has been agreed in 2015. It's an initiation from the United Nations, and it's a legally binding international treaty on climate change, which aims to limit the global warming below 2 degrees. And then, but they ideally drop it to 1.5 degrees to pre-industrial levels. So all 980 countries signed the agreement, and 3 countries yet to ratify it. And the United States also joined, but left the agreement and came back again. And after the latest US administration in January 2021, so it just gave some momentum into the Paris Agreement. So the idea is really each country will set its own emission reduction targets, and then we'll review every 5 years, and then increase these targets eventually bit by bit. So nationally determined contributions are the key elements for all necessary actions to be triggered, and then also plans to be built for stopping or at least controlling the contribution from the greenhouse gases that was allegedly created by the mankind. So the key elements from this Paris Agreement is that it talks about mitigation, transparency, global stocktake, voluntary arrangements based on the pledges, adaptation to be widely used, and also loss and damage fund for the vulnerable countries, and then identifying some roles for the cities, regions, local authorities, and obviously the support which is promised from the developed nations to developing nations. So obviously this creates some kind of dilemma for all stakeholders, the coal producers, users, and policymakers to stop the climate change. So in a way, these challenges can be highlighted as meeting the greenhouse gas emission targets, because once you sign the agreement treaty, you are legally obliged to reach, at least to show some kind of activity to reach those targets. And then you need to prioritize your choices, how you are going to reach those targets. And then technology transfer from the developed nations to developing nations about the green technologies that would give easy transition from these hardcore fossil fuel energy generations to the green technologies. And then obviously you need to build the capacity building, capability building, and you can ask the questions at any time, or it's up to you, or after the presentation. I'm fine with any of those. Capacity and capability building in developing nations, mainly coming from the developed nations. And obviously existing infrastructures need to be transformed into expensive infrastructures to accommodate the new technologies. And Rami has said, hi Lonnie, it's just doing this, you're doing questions. Okay, this, decreasing financing options for the fossil fuels. That means no more easy financing available from the fossil fuels. No consensus yet how these targets would be achieved. And then obviously use of climate science carbon budget models versus climate policy carbon budgets. Coordination of different government departments on common carbon budget policies, and reconciling the pressures coming from the current and projected trends in the world population, economic growth, and energy needs. And obviously, you need to keep the balance between demand and supply chain, so that the premature removal of fossil fuels from the energy portfolio will not create a significant disadvantage for the national economies. That's why you need to really be careful about not to screw the market economics, i.e. Very expensive energy for consumers in the short to medium term. So as I mentioned, the financing is becoming more and more difficult. Many of the major banks in the Western Hemisphere, especially, signed to Equator principles. I think the last time it was about 130, more than 120 banks signed into Equator principles, which are basically committing the financing community to comply with the environmental and social principles. And so the reason is that the banks do not want to be seen as the dirty gang to finance these fossil fuel projects. So ever increasing campaigns on global warming and fossil fuels by the environmentalist lobby groups and media coverages also making life very, very difficult for the fossil fuel industry, especially for the investors who want to go into the energy generation, but obviously facing with the environmental lobby. So, yes.
There's a question from Arthur.
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Arden. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Just a simple question on the Paris Agreement. What impact does it have on coal mining, the future of coal mining? Or is that still coming in the presentation? Thank you.
It's coming in the presentation. So the whole idea is to really stop the use of fossil fuels and then move into the more environmentally friendly technologies or generation facilities, so that the fossil fuel is going to be no longer part of the energy portfolio, or at least for the industrial usage.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
No problem. And obviously we need to educate the public, and then the public is kind of scared by the environmentalist lobby that we are all going to die, and then the end is coming soon. And so even the young generations, the younger generations are really scared of tomorrow, and especially in the Western world, that the fossil fuels are the dirty tool to kill the planet. So that's why the coal industry is now in defense, especially due to climate change concerns, social resistance towards coal, increased competition coming from the renewable energy sources. Obviously, the air quality concerns, if you go to China or Mongolia, especially for energy generation, the air quality is significantly low in these countries. Obviously, they are making big media presence when these things happen, and then obviously the coal is becoming more and more lonely in its war to survive. And then obviously when you have got all these big colossal facilities imposing on the scenery, that it becomes visual impact on the surrounding communities, etc. So there are also some waste to be generated, like ash and then gypsum, etc. And then you need to handle the disposal of these things. And then some of the coal projects turn into not really good money-making exercise, but poor investment on the returns. And then obviously the investors' reluctance started to shy away from the coal projects, and obviously this has affected the policymakers, and started to talk more and more about the Paris Agreement, and then its clauses to be implemented for the future, and then alternatives to be considered. And but obviously there are a number of issues with the alternatives to be considered, which I'll be talking about shortly in the next few minutes. And but when we talk about all these transitions from the current situation to the next phase, we need to take into consideration a number of facts. Population is increasing all over the world. Energy demand is obviously in return increasing. And we know that the industrial development and economic growth is shifting from west towards east and south. And obviously the ease of conversion from fuel to energy is another factor in this transitional period. So let's talk about population increase. So we know that since 1950s, especially the population in the developing countries increasing rapidly. So the world population was about 2.5 billion in 1950s, and now it's reached to 8 billion in 2022. And by 2030, it's going to reach another 500 million to add, and then it's 8.5. And by the time when we reach to 2050, the population is going to be around 10 billion. So obviously, when we look at who's contributing to population growth, and I just took the top 20 countries here. Many of them are developing nations. There are a few, obviously, nations like America, Japan, and Germany occupying the top 20, but rapidly the others are catching up with the population growth. But one thing is not changing in this top 20 ranking. China, India, and Indonesia are the key countries. In Africa, Nigeria is coming in a big force. The Democratic Republic of Congo is coming as well. In the Asian countries, Bangladesh, Egypt, and the Philippines also making their way to top 20 in population growth. So obviously, this will be translated into energy demand. And when we look at the energy distribution or demand distribution from the world's population, and it's the most of the demand is coming from Asia, and then following the Americas and Europe and other Eurasian countries, Oceanic countries. So they are kind of stationary, but the steady increase can be seen in the Middle East and Asia. And then this will be also translated into the usage of available sources to generate energy. And most of the energy, if you look at these countries' plans, coming from coal, and the others also include in the list, but most of the coal users are located in Asia, particularly India and China. Obviously, there are other factors to increase the energy demand, wars, ethnic conflicts, and there's another, please send your name for attendance. Okay, it's nothing to do with me. And then unusual energy demand can be created in the short while. For example, the latest earthquake in Turkey calls about 1 million or about 1.5 million people to migrate to other cities, which would just generate additional issues from accommodation to energy to food and all other social issues associated with that. So if you look at the overall sort of distribution, who has got no clean cooking facilities and then no electricity, most of them are still in Africa and Asia. And although all these countries are doing their best to give their population what they deserve, there are still millions and millions of people who have got no access to the clean cooking facilities and proper energy access. So what we are also seeing here is these new developing economies. I'm sure you all heard of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And now the same people who come up with this acronym come up with MINT. These countries, Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. And then some others also added that, maybe in addition to these MINT countries, Bangladesh, Egypt, Iran, Pakistan, Philippines, South Korea, and Vietnam be counted for. So when you look at BRICS countries, it just occupies 25% of the world's land area with 40% of world's population, and then with a GDP of 20 trillion US dollars. And then when you look at the next 11 countries, they got about 10 million square kilometer of land, and then 1.46 billion people living in these countries with the GDP of 6.5 trillion US dollars. So they are a formidable force to reckon. So this shift in the economic growth and industrial development will be translated into the commodities that they use. So in a way, when we look at this simple chart from the British Geological Survey, the coal is the most wanted commodity. It's almost 8 billion tons. And then the next one is iron. It's almost 3.1 billion. And then the obvious elements like aluminium, rich bauxite, salt, etc., is occupying the list. So this is not a coincidence. I mean, if you want to change the society, if you want to develop the nations, if you want to grow, you need to produce steel. You need to produce cement to make the things happening in that economy. I think there are two questions. Oh, no, okay. So for other facts, like the world still comes from the blast furnace route, about 70%, and this uses about 630 kilograms of coke per ton of steel. And then the same applies to cement production. You need about 200 kilograms of coal to produce 1 ton of cement. And then if you look at the cement production alone, 4.1 billion tons of cement was produced worldwide. And then China alone, production rate was 2.4 billion. It's half of the cement was used and utilized by the Chinese economy. So by 2050, 5.7 billion tons is expected to be consumed by the world population. So these are the facts, apparently. So the other fact is that you need to have energy source that is available and in abundance. And for the policymakers, if you're a government person, and then if you are thinking of your nation's welfare, you need to make some plans. So you need to find some sources that is going to be cost-effective and competitive, not only for the present day, but also the future. And then also the supply will be guaranteed for this energy generation. And obviously, the safe usage is essential for the life cycle of energy conversion process. There are a number of options available for the societies, from the fossil fuels to green energy technologies. Basically, from water to geothermal to wind to nuclear. So they all have got pros and cons, and the cost aspects, as well as the ease of transition from its initial phase to the final delivery stage. And then if you look at the cost for these energy sources, if you want to do properly for coal per kilowatt, the cost for the per kilowatt is 6,495 for coal with the carbon capture facilities. And then nuclear energy is almost the same price, slightly maybe higher depending on your region. And then the other other technologies making the easy option for the transition phase. But when you look at, for example, solar power, if you want to do the concentrated one, using the national grid, etc., you need to spend significant amount of money to make that happen. So these options are there, but obviously the choices are difficult to make. So this is basically coming from, this graph is basically coming from the International Energy Agency 2022 predictions. And when you look at these graphs, and these in 2021 is the business as usual scenario, as if today, the usage of, if you look at the coal contribution in these bars, they're all occupying significant place in the States, in Europe, in India, Japan, China, and so on. So obviously, under the Paris Agreement, there are commitments. So enhanced pledges scenario, APS, and then obviously net zero emissions, the highest ambition that we can think of. So these are basically giving some options to for the countries to consider what needs to be done. So renewable energy and nuclear energy are the key sources that would make that transition much easier, and then obviously safer. And then if the scale of economic safety concerns are addressed permanently. But again, these are pledges, and then when you look at the space the coal occupies in economic development, you cannot really replace these spaces overnight. So the idea is really here, what I'm trying to promote is that don't throw coal away immediately, but think of as your possible options for your energy portfolio generation. So in a way, you need to also think about the limitations, how you are going to transfer your existing facilities to green energy. And for this, the Western financial institutions now have committed not to finance any fossil fuel projects up to 2030, 40. And there are a number of countries around the world dependent on the revenues coming from the fossil fuels, and then which means that these countries will be looking up to other countries to provide initiatives and assistance under the Paris Agreement. So even China now in these days, just before COP26, committed that they are not going to build any more coal-fired power stations outside China. And then Indonesia, Korea, Vietnam have also announced phase out of coal use during COP26. In addition, OECD countries agreed to end export credit support for new coal plants just prior to COP26 in 2021. And further commitment has been received from the developed countries to establish dedicated fund for loss and damage for the vulnerable countries in Egypt just last December, and then holding business and institutions to account after COP27 meeting. So that means that more, the developed countries will be mobilizing more financial support for the developing countries. So in order to keep the energy strategies and energy supply options have become very limited. Normally, power generation portfolios should include a range of options, and the distorted market economy will early retirement of the fossil fuels from this portfolio will create expensive energy for short terms. And then the recent Ukraine war is a good example of how the energy market can be easily skewed, and so in a way, the Ukraine war, Russian invasion, showed the rest of the world that the coal is really still relevant, and all these are headlines coming from different parts of the globe, indicating that the coal is still a viable option for the countries for the foreseeable future. To consider that you cannot really throw away coal easily. On that basis, the change of politics need to be adapted to the changing world. So especially the new superpowers are on the block to champion this, China and India, and then they really resisted to the pressure coming from the developed nations that we cannot really throw our existing energy sources based on the fossil fuels easily overnight. So your own minister, Vada Manteshi, also indicated that, quoting economist Chris Hart in a meeting, closing coal-fired power plants earlier would mean more expensive electricity, fewer jobs, and a third world economy being relegated to the fourth world division. So these are the realities, that the politicians face almost every day. People demand energy, people demand smartphones in their pockets, and then they want to turn the TV on and put the air conditioner on, and this is all based on energy. So energy has to come from somewhere, and it's not really easily available unless you make substantial changes in your governmental politics. And then climate change is really affecting all these policies, and then the Paris Agreement is the key element on this. And then when you look at the Paris Agreement, however, there's no political or scientific consensus on how the national targets should be translated exactly into decarbonization projections. And this means that the countries will develop their own carbon reduction strategies. Imagine all these 198 countries doing different things to meet their national targets. And then there is no really a policeman to regulate all these activities in a way that, yes, the world is now safe, that the temperature is going to stabilize, relationship between the warming and the cumulative net emissions had been achieved, but we don't know when this is going to be achieved. So when you look at the, obviously the initial diagram that I have shown earlier from these global carbon cycle, They are all based on the models that have been generated over the 3 decades. And what we are looking at here is a number of models. Here, 102 models being mimicking almost each other, highlighting some of the conclusions that, over the years, the temperature is increasing. But someone from the States, from University of Alabama, Dr. Christie, looked at the same data, coming from the balloon data set as well as the satellite figures, and then he looked at the global mid-tropospheric temperature variations rather than the surface temperatures, and then he found that the observations made by these satellites and the balloon data sets not really corresponding to all these model predictions. So one model is really very close to this model, real data observation is the Russian model by Volodin and Yansky and Gusev, done in 2010. So you can do a number of iterations of these type of predictions. This is all science, and the science encourages to look at the same data from different angles, which we should really encourage to do so. But if you are making a policy based on the models, etc., your policy also needs to be flexible. So as I mentioned, these numbers I showed earlier in 2000, very early from 1990 to 2020, and then later on 2021, some things really happening. If you look at the overall contribution coming from the mankind, it's almost 1.1% of the 875 gigatons here. So the others are stationary. We don't know, how this is going to be affected, in terms of storage capacity or capability, and or interactions between all these storage locations. So in a way, the policymakers do not understand really the scientific and technical argument behind these models, but they all want one single figure. Give me a figure that I can sell it to the public. However, another group of scientists also looked at the data currently available, and they say that there's about still some space left in the atmosphere, to 700 billion tons of carbon dioxide is available to store. So instead of 200 to 400 billion tons. That means that, Harvey, for example, said that, hold on a second, maybe we need more time to reach those targets rather than, rushing through all this shorter time span. So the choice of analytical models in this case is really important, and who is doing and how and when they will be used also important. All these questions are key elements to understand, the policy making. Should they, and then when you apply the intrinsic sort of relationship between the governmental departments, etc., it's really getting more chaotic in terms of implementing these policies, especially how you are going to, who is going to be responsible for reducing emissions, and who is going to monitor the progress, how will slow-moving industries move forward. These are the questions that the politicians and the technicians need to address. And then, as I mentioned, the models, when you play with the models, inputs and outputs, especially when doing fine tuning, you may create more confusing pictures than the clear picture. So in a way, the scientific community really understand the incomplete understanding of carbon cycle, as well as the impact uncertainties present to the society. So when we look at the existing fossil fuel resources and related infrastructure, superstructure components to environmentally friendly energy sources, this requires really a number of technical difficulties. And obviously, knowledge, education, time, and financial investment, as well as the Paris Agreement's commitment that the developed nations will be helping to developing countries. But there are some issues here. National strategic interests may come under the control of others. Some, if you are holding the purse, someone may say, I'm not going to give you money if you don't follow what I'm saying to you. So this is really, especially in changing world, this is really a dangerous issue for the policymakers in the developing nations. So the other issue is that you may still try to reach those targets, and then you can put a transitional period like China and India did, and then maybe also adopt clean coal technologies in this transitional period, and then capture the carbon dioxide after the coal combustion, and then dispose it safely somewhere in oil reservoirs, etc., or maybe in the oceans. And when you look at, for example, just this was about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, copper-based polymeric filter has been suggested by some university researchers. So, and then turning carbon dioxide into simple baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, to dispose it in the oceans, so that the oceans will be also help slightly basic environment rather than acidic, where the significant amount of carbon is causing to acidity in the oceans as well. So if I just wrap it up briefly, we are talking about an agreement here, which is kind of bringing all the nations into a common goal, and it's kind of mobilizing for this this ultimate aim. But there are some issues along the journey. The world is moving. Especially the development centers are moving from the west to the south and the east, and then the major engine countries are MIN countries or the next 11 countries, and BRICS still dominating the scene there. So renewable energy is going to be is the key element in this transitional period. And then nuclear energy also needs to be considered when security and supply problems resolved in the long term. But fossil fuels, I believe, are still a reliable, a possible choice in the transitional period. And then this requires innovative thinking. Also, we need to educate the public, the challenges and the complexities, and then obviously someone has to pick up the bill, the painful cost involved in meeting these targets. So we need to be careful about the global carbon budget numbers. They are not really simple models. They are very complex. If you look at the publication from ICPP, there are thousands of authors contributing into that document, and there are a number of statements that warning the readers that its model. You need to really judge the outputs from these models carefully. And the other thing is that the quota has been already filled in. There's a little bit unfair argument here. Obviously the China and India and other developing nations say that, hold on a second, you occupied all these quotas before us. Now you tell us to stop use fossil fuels, despite the use that had been done in the past by these developed nations. So in a way, the argument also is a dynamic one. The countries that these countries will need to bring the message back to the developed nations that we need to have a shared carbon footprint, and how we can develop these policies together. So the other message is that early retirement of these fossil fuels from the energy portfolios can easily distort the long-term development plans, especially for the developed nations. And then the new innovative funding arrangements maybe need to be made. Regional banks, to finance some of these fossil fuel projects, locally, to assist to reach those aspirations, in transition to totally fossil fuel free environment. And then at least to this transitional period, energy needs would be provided from the available sources. And so when we look at the recent climate change due to industrial revolution, this is a very brief moment in geological scale, we shouldn't forget, with the millions of other climate changes that our planet has seen in the geological history, really bring challenges for the geoscientists. So maybe we need to look at the existing geological studies or academic studies in sedimentary sequences, like regional global transgressions, climate changes in past geological history, periodic floods and cyclicity and response of species to them, etc., may help to understand our current economic, political, and scientific dilemma. I mean, this is an example from Turkey, and very young coal deposit. As you can see, a tree is standing alone in this sediment sequence, and you can see all these type of trees around. So what we are looking at, we don't know exactly, if it's a 1 week event, if it's a 1,000 year event, or if it's a 10,000 or 100,000 year event. But the thing is that this tree is telling us that there is a rapid sedimentation occurring in this deposit, and then maybe we need to look at the sedimentation aspect in a more critical way, to understand our current dilemma about the climate change occurring. So if some uncertainties and ambiguities exist, and there is still some hope for coal. So in a way, if you want to do good coal projects and then involve in the projects, or if you're an investor, etc., you need to establish a technical team, a good technical team, competent one, and to run the projects. Good communication with the project owners and other stakeholders that they're highlighting the funding issues ahead, and a geological mining investigation to establish amount of coal available for power plant operations, so that you shouldn't be running out of fuel for your operations. And I really emphasize this aspect: coal quality characteristics, especially the trace elements, etc., need to be determined from the beginning rather than in the middle of the project or once you start the project. So the appropriate technology power generation based on the coal quality characteristics, and all the NOx, SOx, and carbon dioxide emissions and other environmental elements using efficient, cost-effective clean coal technology methodologies. And finally, consideration of the waste generation and handling, and from the beginning, appropriate environmental social impact assessments by addressing the international finance cooperation and equator principles, and ensuring a security license to operate both the coal mine and the power plant to run the operations in a conflict-free environment. Any consideration for carbon dioxide sequestration options will be an additional positive point in final investment decisions. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. Well, I'll start with the questions from myself. I have two questions. Firstly, do you think, according to that the revised Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees Celsius reduction in global climate temperatures, is it realistic? And then the second question, how long do you think this transition period will be, both for the developing and developed countries? Sorry, your mic is mute. Hakan? Oh, there you go.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
The temperature question, I think it can be maybe realistic, but in a longer term rather than short term. That's my opinion. Obviously, you know, it needs to be thoroughly investigated if that can be achieved by all these 198 countries committing to this pledge that, you know, everyone is going to work for this aim. My take on this one is that the actual period is going to be much longer than, you know, this ambitious in 2030, you know, 2050. The politicians love the round numbers. You know, give me a number. You know, they don't choose 2057, for example. You know, just one number. It makes sense. So it's a number that people just commit themselves for this period. But I think, in my opinion, the Chinese and Indian approach is more realistic than the people who just make these policies in their offices.
All right, thank you. Anybody who has a question, go ahead and ask.
Rufus Kolomela. Thank you, Dr. Arden, for such a comprehensive presentation. I would like to know, from a policy point of view, the coexistence of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan and our existing coal-fired power stations that we have.
In what way do you want me to comment?
That from a policy point of view, how do you see the coexistence of the two there?
Well, to be honest with you, if I'm the politician, I prefer to have, you know, a number of options available to me rather than having one single policy. And so this gives the flexibility for your choices. So if one policy doesn't work, at least, you know, you have the parallel policy to at least to rely on. So my comment would be that, you know, don't put all your eggs into one basket. So if you diversify your options as wide as possible, you know, you will have more flexibility to implement those policies. So just energy or whatever the policies you may have, you know, I think that the best thing is really to convince both the government officials that, you know, some achievable targets would be made up in these policies rather than some empty promises. Because, you know, the last thing that a politician wants to face is that, you know, kind of, you know, swallowing whatever he said or she said in the past, and then saying completely the opposite. So the best thing is really to to address these policy issues from the educational point of view. You need to educate the public. That's the starting point, especially in the West. The people talk about the doomsday scenario, that the planet is going to collapse on its own because of our contribution to the atmosphere through greenhouse gases. But I just show you that how complex is the model is. Although it seems very simple, we are talking about our planet, and then I'm sure many of you might be familiar with the geological models. When we do create geological models, even those models can change with a couple of boreholes drilled in close by areas or maybe in different locations. Your model is going to change completely. When you extrapolate this type of modeling approach to a planetary system, it's not a simple sort of carbon budget policy. You got to have some flexibility in place. Otherwise, you'll be shooting yourself on the foot because others just dictating the rules of the game, as I mentioned about the Paris Agreement. The developed nations are committing themselves to finance these projects in developing nations, and then giving the know-how as well as other finance assistance. But in the meantime, we are still a multi-fragmented planet, which means you've got 198 countries exist, side by side. Everyone has got their own agenda, different future ambitions, etc. So if you are just leaving your national interest to others, that they are going to dictate, you can have this, you cannot have that. To me, that is a dangerous precedent.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any more questions?
I have a question, for my colleagues. I mean, obviously, we are watching South Africa from a distance. We know that you've got all these disputes, the just energy, etc. Your politicians really fighting very hard to defend the corner. But from the public point of view, obviously, this is how the game is going to be decided. The public is going to, in the end, decide what needs to be done in the future. From energy point of view, as well as the implementation point of view, as well as the user point of view, what is the South African society thinking about this global game? Any volunteers?
Let me volunteer myself first. I thought we would not talk about the elephant in the room, but we can now that you said it. I mean, so here's my 2 cents, right, of opinion when it comes to that. South Africa is very complex, right? There's a lot of external influence when it comes to energy and investments and everything else, right? Currently, we are grappling with load shedding, which is basically power cuts, planned power cuts, and we've seen this problem coming. And we have coal, we have lots of coal, but we just can't use it when you have load shedding now. So, I mean, as far as I can say, the involvement of the South African community at large isn't that much of very interested, in terms of what's happening with the national grid and everything else. I mean, it will happen when we have, let's say, stage 10 or whatever, they with lights out completely, we'll take it to the streets and then we'll start, protesting or whatever. But I don't think we are fully vested in exactly what happens in terms of national interests, particularly from an ordinary type of person background. If you talk about policies being signed, there's probably hardly any contribution from ordinary South Africans, only people who have interest in those things. So for instance, if we have groups which are against, global warming, obviously they will sign that, there should not be any power station being built. But do you have communities around which need electricity? For sure, yeah. and then but they don't partake in these things. So as I think to some extent, sharing of information, knowledge, and everything else is not really translated to a certain extent, whereby our national interest can be sort of like ahead. I don't know if anybody else wants to, throw in their 5 cents in terms of that, but I mean, we are in a state of disaster when it comes to electricity in South Africa. Loni, you're in Botswana, so this doesn't affect you. Sorry.
Yeah, I've got a good life here. Yes.
All right, Hakan, I think I was the last person to communicate there. But lastly, I just want to say thank you so much for making time and making this presentation to us. Many, many thanks to you, and have a good evening from your side.
Thank you very much for inviting me over. And it was really a pleasure to talk to you guys. And I wish you all the best and good luck.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, dog.
You.